through what we already know. We already know that our culture is a bit messed up in this department, that we have so many marketing around us every day. I'm guessing that if you guys scrolled through your Instagram, you had some influencer showing you 10 new skincare products you really need. But at the end of the line, I love that advertising at the end where she says, advertising are like crappy friends. They make you feel needy, ugly, and uncool. So it's all about creating a need in maybe what you didn't need. But before the rise of hyper-consumer culture, a famous Wall Street banker said, "We must shift the nation from a needs to a desire culture. People must be trained to desire, to want new things, even before the old has been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality. Man's desire must overshadow his needs." And it gets pretty dark when you dig deeper into the constructed manipulation that goes into every ad. I know that in marketing, marketers can study a demographic for a whole year just to find out what is their most deep desires that we can manipulate into buying our product or a service or even telling a message. I remember I learnt this thing that in Japan, they never drank coffee. And so the marketers came up with this idea where they were like, okay, how can we change that narrative for that nation? So what they did is they started a 20-year process where they introduced coffee, lollies, and ice blocks to 3-4-year-olds in Japan. And in 20 years, the coffee industry hit a boom in Japan because those young infants that were having coffee tasting in lollies and sweets and those sort of things started drinking coffee when they're in their 20s. And that's how Japan now has coffee, which is pretty twisted when you think about it. So one major marketer once said, "Desires can always be created if there are none." So you might be sitting here thinking, I am very evolved, I'm very advanced, I don't really need that many things, like I've been through that, which is great, and it doesn't affect you too much with stuff. Yet we do consume 3,500 messages that write this inner dialogue, which actually determines our choices, and it writes the narrative in where our lives will orientate in the future. For example, if I was to listen to the cultural narrative that says to someone in my stage of life, it would kind of sound a little bit like this, like, you should have your dream job by now. You should drive that car because that makes you look pretty impressive. That I should probably be having more fun. I'm only 25. Why would I get married at 25? Have more fun. Take God and faith seriously in your 30s. That's the sort of things that sometimes I start to even believe when I'm around maybe those messages, maybe friends that are living that life. So these things seem like they are exterior choices, but I'm solely convinced that the consumeristic problem in our world today isn't an exterior choice, an exterior problem. It's an interior problem. It's not what we put in our house, but it's what we put in our hearts. And that then dictates where we go in life. I'm going to be reading a lot in Matthew, so if you guys want to prepare, if you've got your phones, flick to Matthew or go to Matthew on the app. It's interesting because Jesus spoke about money and possessions 800 times, making it the second most referenced topic in the Bible. And Matthew actually speaks a lot about it. So in Matthew 6:19 verse to 21, it says, this is the message, don't hate me, but I like the message. It says, "Don't hoard treasure down there where it gets eaten by moths and corroded by rust, or worse, stolen by burglars. Stockpile treasure in heaven where it is safe from moth and dust." It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. I love that end bit. I feel like it depicts that desire element. It says, where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and you'll end up being. So what you think about, where you desire to be, where your desires are in here, that's where you will end up being in the end. Who is a podcast fan here? Raise your hand. Yes, podcasters, love it. I probably smashed 5 podcasts a day when I was working at Universal Store. Who works at Universal Store? Woo! Warehouse slaves. And they did let you graciously put your earphones in while you did meaningless tasks. But I listen to about 5 podcasts a day, and I really got onto this one called Criminal. And it's not like a, really sick and twisted crime podcast, don't worry. But it goes through old cases and interviews people involved and that sort of thing. I really enjoyed it. I did have to stop it because I was getting really on edge. And every time Joe would come home, I'd be like, freak out. But yeah, so there was this case that really stood out to me, and I think it creates a really good illustration. But in 1973, Stockholm, Sweden, set the scene. Lots of nice Swedish furniture. 2 men hold up a bank and hold 4 bank tellers hostage. Over the course of a week, the robbers tried to negotiate with police and plan their escape. So this whole thing was a week-long thing, and they had these 4 people somewhere in the bottom of the bank. And apparently, they all became, quite close to the robbers, which is very unusual. To cut a long story short, their plan failed, and the police were able to arrest the 2 men and rescue the victims. Yet, as the world waited for a traumatized interview from the hostages, they started to defend the robbers, bringing them flowers to prison and stating how they saw the captors, the people that captured them, as their real heroes, and the police the villains. One even stated, "They were actually quite kind to me. They could have shot me anywhere, but he only shot me in the leg." I'd be pretty cut if someone shot me anywhere, but anyway. Anyone from the outside can see that this is a warped way of thinking. And psychologists all over the world were so confused by this phenomenon that they studied it, and they end up calling it the Stockholm Syndrome. And it pretty much means that the person that is captured starts to believe in and justify the actions of the person that captured them, even villainizing the people trying to rescue them. It kind of made me think of us as Christians sometimes, because we can be like this. We start to think that the things that are taken captive in our life and society are actually giving us meaning. So our perspective is warped like those people in that story. We justify the need for more things, more trips, doing more hours at work to get more of the things and trips, and to be able to live a comfortable life. Yet Jesus calls us to store up our treasures in heaven. I sometimes feel in the caught in the middle of this, of wanting things and experiences and living a good life, a comfortable life. And then the other side, I want to see God work in radical ways in my life. But when I'm trying to have a comfortable life, I'm not really giving him room to do that. So Matthew is where I want to land tonight in the Word. And he was one of the 12 disciples. And he very much lived a life captive to society and wealth and all that sort of thing. And he was actually a tax collector. So he was captive to wealth, but he was very much an outsider in his society. If you follow me to Matthew 9, verse 9. So this is where Matthew meets Jesus. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. That's it. Sorry, a bit uneventful. But Matthew was a tax collector. If we spend any time in the New Testament, that you'll hear about tax collectors, and it's not really positive at all. They're very much the, bottom feeders of society, but they also had a lot of wealth. So people in those times even debated whether tax collectors were even able to experience forgiveness, which is pretty harsh. And when I think about tax collector, though, in this context, it's hard to imagine what they meant, because I kind of think of, they must like maths, taxes, government, maybe an accountant, not the bad image that is painted in the Bible. But the tax collectors were traitors of their own people. It says that they sold out to the wealth and the power that the Romans could provide them. So in today's context, I kind of tried to make a comparison. I kind of thought a corrupt business person that does whatever it takes to make money at expense of people, for profit, willing to do whatever for more things, more money, more status, a never-ending desire. So here is Matthew, our author, in that setting, in that role. But he has a moment with Jesus in the flesh. That seemingly short verse has a lot of great weight, because as he sat there with an array of wealth around him, probably a big chunk he was going to take home for himself, he had a moment with Jesus, and he got up and he left. And when Jesus said, "Follow me," it wasn't just follow me around the block, we'll have a chat and then get back on with your own life. It was, let's be my apprentice. So Dave Ang last week spoke about this concept of being an apprentice. And I think we all kind of have a good understanding of what that means, but it pretty much just means to learn from someone to, do what they do, pretty much. Joel was an apprentice for 3 years, is that right? 4, hard work. No one works harder than Joel, seriously. He's a great, hard-working man. And I was actually, I don't know whether many of you know this, I was an apprentice for a whole month. It was pretty good. I'll tell you a little side story, but I was accidentally an apprentice, actually. So I was living in Sydney, and Brady can testify with me that you literally do mostly anything for money. And there's a lot of like cashies around and a lot of dodgy sort of jobs going about. And at that time, I had about 3 going on. I had some weird jobs going on. Anyway, I saw this ad locally in a hairdresser saying that they needed help. And I was like, great, went for the interview. And then there was 2 owners of the business at the time. So one of them interviewed me. And it was clear to me that it was just an assistant role. And I was going to be, washing hair, sweeping floors, that sort of thing on like busy days. So I was doing that for a few weeks. And then I got pretty good at washing the hair and whatever. And then a few weeks later, the other owner comes to me and starts giving me some clients to cut hair, like guys' hair. And I was like, really? Like, you want me to cut the hair? But I thought, it's pretty local, not super fancy hairdresser. I was like, they must need the help. So I started doing a few haircuts. I don't know how great it was, but I was very confused why I was doing this. And I later found out, because I think the feedback must have been pretty bad, because the other owner that didn't hire me was under the impression that I was an apprentice. And she came to me and said, so where do you go to TAFE? Where do you study? Hairdressing. And I was like, I'm not studying. I'm studying Bible college. I'm I don't know what you're talking about. And she was like, oh. And that was my last day, because I wasn't an apprentice. But anyway, so I'm going to stick to being an apprentice of Jesus, because that is my apocalypse. Am I saying that right? Apocalypse? Yeah, my apocalypse this season is that I want to be an apprentice to the teacher of Jesus. I'm reading this great book at the moment, and I swear I probably told half of you about it already, but it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and he talks about that concept of living a lifestyle that reflects Jesus and being his apprentice and doing what he does. And sometimes that's really hard, especially when it comes to this topic of money and possessions, because Jesus is just going around telling everyone to sell everything. Just sell it, get rid of it. You're rich, you can't come. That's fine. That's kind of the vibe. So it's a very hard concept to kind of understand and unpack and that sort of thing. But a more serious kind of moment for Joel and I recently was that, 4 months ago we were meant to have the big wedding, and it was an emotional time that God really discipled me and apprenticed my heart in this season. And like everyone, we've had disappointments, and probably a lot more disappointing than a wedding. But for me, I had built it up. I had a lot of expectations about what I wanted my wedding to look like, who I wanted there, all these sort of things. And the week before, I definitely wasn't as peaceful and heroic as I'm sounding right now. I went away with Joel's family, and if they didn't know me before, they knew me after, because I was crying. Anyway, but Jesus walked so close to me in that season, and he became my teacher in regards to how I'd react. I remember praying, saying, I don't know how to be okay with this, God. Help me to want what you want. Over the next few days and a lot of prayer and spending time with God and his word, I became more and more at peace. And God transformed my heart to align with him. As an apprentice of Jesus that week, I learnt peace and trust in a greater way than before. And now, looking back, I wouldn't change anything. I think that it was orchestrated by God from the start, and I'm so glad that God was able to walk me through that and give me that lesson that I don't know whether I would have learnt. But yeah, let's go back to our guy, Matthew. And he left a life of wealth to become apprentice of Jesus. So at first he probably struggled with, like we do, being a disciple of Jesus, because if you could imagine coming from a kind of wealthy background and a lot of people not liking you, he probably struggled because Jesus didn't even have a home. He would just rely on other people to look after him when he went to towns, and he was telling everyone to give away their things. Yet Matthew never went back to his old life. It's safe to say that he didn't regret the giving up. He didn't regret the Jesus way of life. Because in Matthew, he actually talks so much about this sort of thing. He's actually, I did check with David Chatelier because I didn't want to be a heretic, but he is the only one who talks about, from the Sermon of the Mount, money and possessions and the storing up of treasures. And he's actually the only one who records the parable of the hidden pearl in his gospel. And I can't help but think that it's because it really resonated with him. I can imagine that as he's sitting under the teaching of Jesus, and Jesus is just saying these things that are so revolutionary to him, that he felt this sense of freedom in Jesus' teaching for something that he was captive to. He was a prisoner to this way of life and this constant striving for more wealth and money and things. I just want to go to that verse now where it talks about the parable, and it's Matthew 13, verse 44. So the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then his joy, he went and sold all his things and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found the one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Everything. I think it's important to paint that picture. We look at the after. So there's a guy in a field, and he's got a pearl in his hand. He's got nothing. He's got no house, no car, nothing that we would pin any sort of worth and identity to. But just imagine looking at his face, walking up to him, seeing if he's okay. You've got nothing. But he's got this deep well of satisfaction. He's got everything he needs with this pearl in his hands. He was satisfied. But can we say that? We say we know this gospel, we say we have this truth, but can we say that? We're completely satisfied. I know that that's not my truth at times. Sometimes I can kind of say, oh yeah, when I'm working in that job that gives me purpose and value, I'll feel like, yeah, I'm completely content. Or maybe for you, you feel like, oh, you know, when I find that life partner, like, I'm going to feel really content. Or maybe it's just friends or popularity or something that you feel a little bit bound to. Because really, at the end of the day, we are all chasing our own pearls, no matter what they are, no matter if we look deep into our desires. So many of us want to do something great, myself included. But for what? Are we storing up treasures in heaven, or are we storing up our own treasures? Is this desire to be remembered, to have something to pin my worth and identity to have followers, to feel financially secure? Yet even with those things, would we be as satisfied as that guy sitting in the field with the pearl in the palm of his hand? I don't think so. What if we lived our lives out, fully convinced that our desires can be completely met? We can be completely satisfied with the kingdom mindset, with Jesus and what he promises. Because I think we can get kind of a bit confused, because then we can say, oh, do we need to walk away and sell everything we have? Well, no, but I think we need to be discipled and be apprentices to Jesus. And then our desires end up lining up with his. And sometimes God calls us to do things that doesn't make sense. You know, he could ask us to give away a certain amount of money, but the world could say, oh, that would be better off if you bought a house. But that mindset comes back to that knowing that if God calls you to do something, he's going to look after you. He says in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who are weary. Come to me, all who are weary." That pearl holds so many things, and it's not just the exterior things. That kingdom mindset, that Jesus mindset deals with the things that make us consume, that makes us want more, that corrupts our desire. Are you weary from anxiety? Peace is in that pearl. Are you weary from striving? Approval is in that pearl. Are you weary from shame? Healing is in that pearl. I feel like I can't talk about the kingdom of God without mentioning how we come to experience that. Because there was a time in my life where I was that pearl, and Jesus sold everything. He gave up everything to have me. Because he saw me as that priceless thing with an infinity amount of worth. And if you don't know that tonight, if you haven't experienced that goodness and that freedom that comes with being in the kingdom of God, I encourage you to come. Come tonight to him. There's a song that my parents used to sing when I was younger, and it's an old hymn, and it's got beautiful words that kind of gives a step-by-step way to experience this freedom and to become more of an apprentice to Jesus and less of an apprentice to the world and seeking otherworldly things. It's called "Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus." And the words are, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." Isn't that such a beautiful way of looking at it? And it's a beautiful thing to do. That if we are just to change direction a bit and start consuming the things of Jesus and locking eyes with him, we actually start becoming more like him. And the things that we would usually struggle with, the desires, the things of earth, will come strangely dim in the light of his glory and his grace. And your life becomes a lot less about yourself and a lot more about him. And in him, it becomes about others. So I just ask these guys to sing that over us tonight. And as you're sitting there, just think, what am I captive to? What desires have been warped by this world? And bring them to Jesus. And if you haven't met Jesus before, or if you haven't spoken to him in a long time, tonight's the night. He wants to just love you.